We all just kind of expect mail delivery to happen, don't we? Rain, sleet, snow,
Yeah.
it just arrives. But what about when that shine isn't just bright sunlight, but it's blistering, really dangerous heat? Today, we're doing a deep dive into the hidden and sometimes tragic dangers faced by essential workers. We're focusing particularly on our dedicated USPS employees when those temperatures really soar.
Yeah, it's something many people just don't think about day to day.
Exactly. So our mission for you in this deep dive is to unpack the vital prevention strategies for heat stress. What can actually be done. Then, understand the real-world consequences when those strategies fail, which unfortunately happens. And finally, explore the complex organizational dynamics behind these incidents. We're drawing insights from safety guidelines, investigative reports, and worker advocacy to give you the full picture.
So we're looking at everything from practical tips to the bigger systemic issues.
Right. From the ground-level safety stuff to the heartbreaking human cost, and then that larger debate about corporate responsibility and worker rights. Okay, so let's unpack this. Before we get deep into the systemic problems, let's start with what postal workers, or really anyone working outdoors in serious heat, needs to know to protect themselves. And the first thing, it sounds basic, but it's hydration. This is absolutely non-negotiable.
Right.
We're talking about drinking water frequently, like ideally every 15 to 20 minutes, and crucially, even before you actually feel thirsty. Staying ahead of dehydration is just key.
And that's where the insight really starts, isn't it? Because, frequent hydration, it sounds like common sense, but the consistent application actually drinking that often, even when you're not thirsty yet, finding the time for those sips, that's where the real challenge often lies in practice.
Absolutely. And tied right into that, regular cool-down breaks, they're critical.
Yeah.
You need to seek shade or, ideally, air conditioning whenever possible. Let your body temperature actually come down.
Yeah, give your body a chance to recover.
And we also need to talk about gradual acclimatization. This is a big one. So many heat-related fatalities actually happen in the first few days of working in extreme heat. The body just hasn't adjusted yet. So if you're new on the job, or maybe coming back after some time off, you have to ease into the full workload over several days.
It's your body basically building up tolerance, which is vital. But the reality is, in a fast-paced work environment, that gradual approach, sometimes it gets overlooked. And that leads directly to danger.
Right. And then there's clothing. Pretty straightforward stuff here. Lightweight, light-colored, loose-fitting clothes. A hat is essential. It might seem counterintuitive to some, but long sleeves and pants can actually help sometimes by blocking direct sun if the fabric is breathable. That's the key part.
Yeah, trapping heat is the last thing you want.
Definitely. And don't forget sunscreen SPF 30 or higher and UV-blocking sunglasses. But maybe most importantly, knowing your body's warning signs. Early symptoms of heat stress, things like excessive sweating, muscle cramps, maybe feeling dizzy, headache, nausea.
Those are the first flags.
Exactly. Those are your body's signals yelling, stop, hydrate, cool down, before things get really bad.
Yeah.
Seriously, you can't ignore these symptoms or try to just push through. And what's particularly alarming, and you need to know this, is that confusion or even just irritability can be a sign of impending heat stroke. It's not weakness, it's a serious medical sign.
That's such a critical distinction, and it really highlights why things like a buddy system or active supervisor check-ins are so important. Because if you're getting confused, you might not realize the danger you're in yourself.
Good point.
So it means planning the really strenuous work for cooler parts of the day, if possible, checking on your coworkers, and supervisors need to be physically checking on carriers during heat waves. These aren't just nice ideas, they're potentially life-saving measures.
Exactly. And fostering a workplace culture where it's absolutely okay to seek help for heat symptoms. It's not about poor performance, it's about safety.
Okay, so we've covered prevention. But what happens when, prevention isn't quite enough and someone starts actually experiencing symptoms? What's the immediate protocol then? Right, that's the absolutely crucial next step. If you start feeling those heat stress symptoms, immediate action is paramount. The first thing, it's simple. Stop working and get cool. Right away. Move to shade or, even better, an air-conditioned space as soon as you possibly can. A building lobby, your vehicle if it has AC, anywhere cool.
Okay, stop work, get cool. What next?
Immediately notify your supervisor, let them know what's happening, and this isn't optional for them. They are supposed to respond by getting you relief, getting you help, not pushing you to keep going.
Okay, and once you're in that cool place?
Well, if you're alert and you're not vomiting, start hydrating. Small sips of water or an electrolyte drink are good. Loosen your clothing, take off your hat, anything tight, and just rest in that cool area until your symptoms completely go away. Heat exhaustion can often be managed this way, but it's crucial to act fast because it can worsen quickly if ignored.
And knowing the difference between heat exhaustion and the really scary one, heat stroke, that's
Oh,
critical.
right. Absolutely life-saving. For heat exhaustion, think heavy sweating, headache, weakness, maybe nausea. You might need a medical evaluation. Ideally, someone should take you to a clinic or an ER. If medical care isn't right there, call 911 for guidance. And never, ever leave someone suffering from heat illness alone.
Okay, so that's exhaustion. When do you call 911 immediately? What are those absolute red flag, life-threatening signs?
If you even suspect heat stroke, that is a full-blown, life-threatening emergency. No hesitation. The telltale signs here are things like confusion, loss of consciousness, seizures, or critically, if the person stops sweating, their skin might feel dry and hot even though it's scorching outside. That's a really bad sign.
Okay, confusion, passing out, seizures, dry, hot skin.
Yeah. In those cases, you must call 911 immediately. Minutes truly, truly count. And while you're waiting for EMS, you need to start aggressive cooling efforts right then and there. Move them to shade or AC if you can. Get their outer clothing off. Soak them with cool water. Use a hose, wet towels. Pour water on their head, neck, armpits, groin. If you happen to have ice packs, put them on the neck, under the arms. Fan the person constantly. Just one really important note. Do not try to give fluids if the person is unconscious or confused.
Wow, okay, so the goal is just cool them down fast until help arrives.
Exactly. Lower their body temperature and keep their airway clear.
It's incredible how quickly things can escalate from feeling unwell to a life-threatening emergency. But given these serious risks, what legal recourse or, protections are actually in place for workers if they do suffer a heat-related injury on the job?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, especially for federal employees like postal workers, because there are specific steps you need to take. The foundational thing to understand here is that a heat-related illness, whether it's heat exhaustion or, God forbid, heat stroke, is considered a work-related injury. Full stop.
Okay, so it's not just seen as a personal health issue, it's officially recognized as an occupational hazard for them.
Exactly right. That's a really significant distinction for federal employees. It means you are absolutely entitled to workers' compensation. The key form you need to know about is called the CA-1. That's a federal employee's notice of traumatic injury. The immediate action, as soon as you can, is to notify your supervisor that you became ill because of the heat while working and tell them you intend to file this CA-1 form. Your supervisor is actually required to provide it to you right away. So getting that form is the first step.
Yes, and the absolute critical takeaway here is timeliness. You need to file that CA-1 within 30 days. Why 30 days? Because that's the deadline to be eligible for something called continuation of pay, or COP. COP means you can get up to 45 days of your normal pay while you're out, rather than having to burn through your own sick leave or annual leave.
Okay, so that 30-day window is really important for protecting your income.
Hugely important. And a smart move. Send a quick email to your supervisor confirming you reported the injury and requested the form. Just creates a simple paper trail.
Makes sense. So CA-1 covers your pay. What about getting the medical care paid for?
Good question. For medical care, you need to ask your supervisor for a different form, the CA-16. It's an authorization for examination and a DUR treatment. This form is important because it basically guarantees payment for your initial medical visit and then up to 60 days of treatment by a doctor of your choice. Supervisors are actually supposed to issue this CA-16 within 4 hours for urgent injuries like heat stroke.
4 hours? That seems pretty quick. What if they don't?
Yeah, well, if they drag their feet, you should still go get the medical care you need. Don't wait if you're seriously ill. But make sure you follow up with the USPS Injury Compensation Office afterward about getting that authorization sorted out. Now, when you fill out your part of the CA-1, be specific. Don't just write, got sick from heat.
Right. You need details.
Exactly. Like, on date, while delivering mail in 100-degree heat, I experienced dizziness, nausea, and collapsed. Describe how the work conditions led to your illness. And make sure you check that box for continuation of pay, COP, if you think you'll need time off. You don't need all the medical reports right at that moment. Those can be submitted later. Just get the form filed.
Okay, so fill it out specifically, check the COP box, and once it's filled out, what's the absolute must-do step then?
Submit it to your supervisor as soon as possible, obviously, electronically or paper, whatever their process is. But here's the absolute crucial part, and I can't stress this enough. Get the tear-off receipt portion of the CA-1 right there on the spot, hand it over, get that receipt back.
That little stub is that important.
It's proof. It's your proof of timely filing. It protects you if there's ever any question later about when you submitted it. If there's any delay in getting that receipt, document it. Again, maybe an email. Following up, submitted my CA1 today, awaiting receipt. Your supervisor then sends it up the chain to the USPS Injury Comp Office, and they're supposed to get it to the Federal Office of Workers' Compensation Programs, OWCP, within 10 working days.
And you should get a copy yourself.
Yes, you absolutely have the right to a copy of the completed CA1 from your supervisor. Keep it for your records. And remember, you have the right to choose your own treating doctor. It's best to pick one, if you can, who has experience with heat-related illnesses. And make sure, really emphasize this to your doctor, make sure they clearly document in their medical report that your condition was caused by work-related heat exposure. That medical narrative is vital for getting your OWCP claim approved.
Okay, so connecting this back to the bigger picture, these procedures, the forms, the deadlines, they exist to protect workers, right? But the critical takeaway here seems to be that accessing these rights isn't always straightforward. It often requires the worker to be really diligent, document everything, and actively advocate for themselves.
That's a perfect way to put it, because despite these protections existing on paper, the really sobering reality is that heat stress continues to cause severe injuries and, tragically, even deaths on the job. And yeah, it's not just about policy and procedure forms, it's about people's lives. And unfortunately, the statistics tell a really grim story. There was a 2024 report from the USPS Office of Inspector General. It found that from fiscal year 2022 through the middle of 2024, there were 1,332 heat-related accidents involving postal employees.
Wow, 1,300 in roughly 2.5 years. That's a staggering number. It averages out to hundreds of incidents every year.
It really is. And get this, over half of those, 714 incidents, were serious enough that they resulted in lost work time or required actual medical intervention, meaning they were officially classified as heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And like you'd expect, these numbers are probably undercounts because not every instance of heat sickness gets formally reported through the accident system.
Right, someone might just feel awful, go home, and not file anything.
Exactly. But beyond the numbers, there are these individual stories that are just tragic. On June 20th, 2023, a 66-year-old letter carrier named Eugene Gates Jr. collapsed and died while he was delivering mail in Dallas, Texas. The heat index that day was reported at a staggering 117 degrees Fahrenheit.
117. That's brutal.
Unimaginable. And his postal vehicle, like so many of the older ones, had no air conditioning.
It's just heartbreaking to even picture that. And OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, they investigated that, didn't they?
They did. They investigated. And they actually cited the USPS. They found USPS failed to protect Mr. Gates from the heat hazards. They levied a fine, I think it was around $15,000. And OSHA recommended things like earlier start times and a formal heat acclimatization plan.
Which really begs the question, why weren't those things already standard practice, especially in places like Dallas?
It certainly does. And that summer, the summer of 2023, saw other carriers in serious distress too. OSHA also investigated the death of a postal worker in North Carolina as potentially heat-related. And down in Texas again, a carrier named Christy Jacob fainted on her route. She was hospitalized for a heat-induced heart arrhythmia. She reported she hadn't received any heat training that year, and maybe most shockingly, she said her supervisor actually mocked her and told her to keep going when she reported feeling ill earlier.
Mocked her for symptoms of heat illness. I mean, that points to a really, really problematic workplace culture, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the tragedies didn't stop there. More recently, on May 30th, 2025, Dan Workman, a 59-year-old carrier in Grand Junction, Colorado, died on his route. It was 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, his delivery vehicle had no air conditioning.
Another one. It's awful.
And then in a truly heartbreaking echo of Eugene Gates' case just 2 years prior, on June 21st, 2025, Jake Taylor, a 51-year-old Dallas letter carrier, collapsed and died on his route. Temperatures were near 100 degrees. He was a 28-year veteran of the Postal Service.
A 28-year veteran.
Yeah. The president of the National Association of Letter Carriers, Brian Renfro, he even testified before Congress about Jake Taylor's death, really emphasizing the extreme heat conditions. Taylor's death was the second heat-linked carrier death in the Dallas area in just 2 years.
So just to recap, we're talking about at least 3 letter carriers, Gates, Workman, and Taylor, dying from heat exposure just between 2022 and 2025. And the unions say that since 2012, at least 7 carriers nationwide have died from heat exposure on the job.
That's the number they cite, yes. And OSHA has definitely stepped up its scrutiny. They keep citing USPS for exposing carriers to excessive heat. And OSHA officials reiterate over and over, heat illnesses and deaths are preventable.
They are preventable. So USPS, for its part, what do they say? They point to programs they have?
Right. USPS states it has a National Heat Illness Prevention Program, the HIPP, and they require annual training for employees. However, these continued incidents, these deaths and injuries, they clearly show, as one report put it, a significant gap between written policy and actual outcomes.
Which brings us back to that critical question. If these tragedies are preventable and there are policies and programs supposedly in place, why are they still happening? It really points to some kind of deeper disconnect, doesn't it, between the policy on paper and the practice on the street?
Exactly. So what does all this mean when we look at the bigger picture? Labor relations, safety culture within USPS. This is really where the unions step in forcefully. The postal unions, especially the National Association of Letter Carriers, NALC, and the American Postal Workers Union, APWU, they are very clear in their stance. They believe USPS management has fundamentally not done enough to protect workers from heat.
So they're saying the HIPP program, the official program, it might exist, but it's just not being implemented effectively out where the carriers are working?
That's precisely their argument. NALC President Brian Renfro has stated that while the heat illness prevention program exists, it's simply insufficient. And he says management has consistently resisted more meaningful substantive measures. In fact, data shows USPS is unfortunately one of the top companies in the country when it comes to severe heat-related incidents, with hundreds of injuries reported every year.
That's not a list you want to be at the top of.
Not at all. And the unions advocate for what seem like pretty basic things: adjusting delivery hours during heat waves, ensuring universal heat safety training actually happens, and getting climate control vehicles rolled out much faster.
And they point to a problematic culture, right?
Yes, a major concern from the unions is what they describe as a pervasive, productivity-driven culture that tends to downplay weather dangers. There have been some really unsettling examples that have come to light supporting this. For instance, an administrative judge in one OSHA case actually found that USPS's culture effectively sent the message that heat is not an excuse for performance issues.
Wow. So performance over safety.
That's the implication. And get this. Back in 2022, USPS was even accused of falsifying thousands of heat safety training records for carriers.
Falsifying training records? I mean, that just completely undermines any claim that training is happening properly.
Absolutely. And then there were those internal communications that surfaced.
Oh, yeah, like that email.
Right. The one from 2023 where an internal email from a USPS manager came out instructing supervisors to literally turn off the air conditioning in post offices to force carriers out onto their routes faster.
Unbelievable.
Or maybe even worse, that internal memo the union obtained that apparently called carriers who succumbed to heat illness stupid or careless, and reportedly stated, "We can't cure stupidity, we can only provide consequences."
That language is just hostile. It directly contradicts any public statement about prioritizing safety.
It really does. It's an internal contradiction that seems to explain a lot about why there's this breakdown in the safety culture that the unions describe.
So what about the actual conditions on the ground? Are the basic safety measures even being implemented consistently? What do the unions report?
Well, according to the unions, far from it.
Mm.
They report a widespread lack of implementation of even the most basic measures. They frequently hear from members about things like no cool water being provided at the station, broken fans or air conditioning in the facilities themselves, missing shade canopies at rest points.
Just the basics aren't there sometimes.
Apparently so. And workers have filed many hazard reports, that's Form 1767, documenting these issues. There are also persistent allegations that the required weekly safety talks on heat are often skipped, or that the mandatory annual heat training is sometimes falsified. Like, they found records showing training completed on days when specific carriers weren't even at work.
That's blatant falsification, if true.
And adding insult to injury, there are documented cases of carriers actually being disciplined for taking extra breaks or simply slowing down their pace in extreme heat conditions. Remember Eugene Gates Jr., who tragically died? He was reportedly reprimanded by management for taking breaks to try and cope with the heat before his death.
Discipline for trying to stay safe.
Yeah. And in some instances, supervisors have even reportedly moved carrier start times later into the day, right into the hotter afternoon hours, presumably for operational reasons, completely disregarding the increased heat risk. The NALC's position on this is absolutely firm. There is no standard pace a carrier must maintain in dangerous heat. Carriers should not and cannot be punished for exercising caution. Their health has to come first.
So it sounds like on one hand, the official USPS policy relies on workers knowing their limits. But then on the other hand, management is reportedly penalizing them when they try to act on those limits. That's a fundamental conflict, a double bind.
It absolutely is. And the unions haven't just been complaining, they've taken significant action. The NALC, for instance, has formally joined OSHA proceedings against USPS. They're pushing hard for a formal federal OSHA heat standard, something that doesn't currently exist specifically for heat exposure. OSHA usually relies on the general duty clause.
A dedicated standard would have more teeth.
That's the hope. After the recent Texas fatalities, 77 members of Congress actually sent a strongly worded letter to USPS demanding better safeguards. But the USPS response was widely seen by unions and advocates as dismissive, basically just pointing back to their existing HIPP program that the unions say isn't working. So the unions themselves widely circulate heat safety information to their members, encourage them to use tools like the OSHA Heat Safety app. And crucially, they encourage members to stand up for their rights, file those hazard reports, use the CA1 process we talked about, and file grievances against management if safety protocols are being ignored.
And USPS management, what's their official public stance amidst all this?
Well, USPS management, for its part, publicly states it has taken steps. They talk about distributing things like cooling neck gaiters, providing coolers for water sometimes, and repeatedly emphasizing hydration in their communications. And they always point back to having the HIPP program with its training modules and awareness materials.
And that really highlights the core tension, doesn't it? A policy might exist on paper, beautifully written, but if there's a breakdown in actual enforcement on the ground, if there's a hostile or dismissive culture from supervisors, or if there is an overriding prioritization of delivery metrics over human lives, then that policy becomes effectively meaningless. The unions basically assert that USPS's approach, whatever it says on paper, has been dangerously inadequate in practice.
And a major, long-running, very visible issue remains: the lack of air conditioning in the vast majority of the older postal delivery trucks. Carriers often describe them as metal ovens on wheels.
Yeah, I've heard that phrase. Seems accurate.
And while the new generation of vehicles will have air conditioning, the rollout is slow. Many carriers won't see those new trucks for years. So the unions continue to call for more immediate solutions. More schedule flexibility during heat waves, like letting carriers start much earlier in the morning, or even, in truly extreme conditions, suspending delivery temporarily. And they want managers to be clearly directed and held accountable for prioritizing worker safety over potentially delaying the mail.
There's also been criticism, hasn't there, that USPS often chooses to fight OSHA citations when they are issued, which can create an impression, fair or not, that they're more focused on avoiding blame than on actually fixing the underlying safety problems.
That criticism is definitely out there. Ultimately, what we're seeing is this significant and sometimes deadly disconnect. And the really big question becomes, how do we bridge this gap? How do we ensure that no postal worker, or any worker for that matter, is ever told to just keep going when they're facing life-threatening heat? So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive today. We started with those vital individual prevention strategies for heat stress, hydration, breaks, acclimatization. Then we moved into the tragic human cost when those measures fail or aren't followed, looking at the injuries and, devastatingly, the fatalities.
Yeah, the personal stories are really impactful.
They really are, and we've seen how, while the preventative methods definitely exist and are known, the real challenge seems to lie in their consistent implementation on the ground, and maybe even more deeply, in fostering a necessary culture shift within large organizations like the Postal Service. There's clearly this ongoing struggle between worker advocacy, the unions pushing for safety, and management priorities, which often seem focused elsewhere. And the statistics on injuries and fatalities, they just underscore that this isn't some abstract policy debate. It's truly a matter of life and death for these essential workers.
The key insight, I think, is really clear. Seemingly common sense safety measures are often undermined by systemic pressures, by productivity demands, and sometimes by outright cultural resistance within the workplace.
Exactly. So here's something to think about as we wrap up. Consider this. In a world where we rely so heavily every single day on essential services like mail delivery, what fundamental shift in priorities, both public priorities and corporate priorities, is actually needed? What shift is needed to ensure that no one's dedication to their job, their commitment to serving us, ever has to cost them their life, especially as they face increasingly extreme environmental conditions like this dangerous